I have a lot of nostalgia for Rampage. I played it an awful lot on the NES, didn't really know too much about the PlayStation games, and had no idea about the GameCube and PS2 game. And then the movie came out in 2018. I was a little excited about it and then completely forgot about it until I saw it probably a few months ago in 2025. Instead of going over all the games individually, I decided I wanted to put them all into one video. So here it is. I'm going to be covering the entire Rampage series, or at least all of the games that I'm aware of in it. And then I'll talk a little bit about the movie and also some of the other monster movies that may have inspired a few of the different characters. The NES port of Rampage is the one that I remember the most. I had no idea this was in the arcades or that it was on the Master System. So I didn't know that there was a character named Ralph in the game or that he was a giant wolf monster. I kind of feel like I missed out on that, but oh well, I got to play as Lizzie and George, and that was pretty fun anyway. The first time I rented this game, it was from one of those like mom and pop rental places. We didn't have a Blockbuster until really the late 90s where I lived, so if you wanted to rent a game, you either had to go down to quite literally the general store, or you had to hope that, the little area up by the grocery store was occupied by a rental place at that point in time, which wasn't always true. It's really weird trying to explain a hometown to some people, because not every single store remained in one place for very long. You had a lot of just shops that would change locations or disappear. That happened with the rental store quite a bit. I remember playing it a few times after renting it. One of them was at this weird after-school daycare place. So we didn't have a babysitter or anything, and I was pretty young still. So I would go with a bunch of neighborhood kids to somebody's house, and she would watch us for a while. And each of us were given 10 minutes to play video games. We could play anything that they had there, and Rampage happened to be one of the games that this kid owned. We played it, and I was like, oh god, this is amazing. And for some weird reason, I don't know why, maybe it was because I was getting into monster movies at the time, but I thought that it was Godzilla and King Kong. And that just really amazed me that somebody made a game where these two awesome monsters are put together into a video game and you could go around destroying cities. I don't know why I thought it was Godzilla and King Kong, but that's what my, little 8-year-old mind believed. And then I told my friend Drew about it, we rented the game, and I realized it was George and Lizzie, but it didn't matter. Then, decades later, I played the Master System port, and we got to play as, Ralph. And a friend of mine that I was with at the time was kind of surprised that there was a third monster in there, because neither of us had any idea that, this was an arcade game. Not something that we looked up until many decades later, and yeah. It's still one of my favorite NES games of all time, and I just have a whole bunch of fun memories playing it, but all those memories are basically the same memory. So Rampage World Tour was released in 1997, almost a full decade after the original game was released. It's a reboot of the series. The gameplay is pretty much the same. You have a few other moves that you can do, but by and large, it's essentially the same game. The way this game was made was the two original developers for the 1986 Rampage. They, went to Midway and said, hey, we want to make this game again, after they had gone off and started their own company. Midway said, okay, great, and that's how we ended up with Rampage World Tour. This was ported to the PS1, the N64, Sega Saturn, and the Game Boy, and it was also in the arcades. The PS1 port received much better reviews than the other versions. Most of the complaints were about a lack of content in the game, and it sticking way too close to the original. Because it essentially is the original, just with a few more cities, and you're doing the exact same thing you did in the original game. Just destroy all the cities on the screen, and then you move on to the next stage. There's a little bit of a difference where you can scroll left or right. Aside from that, it's exactly the same as the original. Whether you enjoyed it or not, this is pretty much what you're getting. I have no memories of playing this game when I was a kid. It completely slipped past me when I was growing up. I was way too focused on other stuff in 1997, mostly Final Fantasy VII and any other RPG I could get my hands on. So, yeah, no idea this game was even made until probably about 20 years after the fact. My biggest complaint was just that there just wasn't anything new added to this game. It essentially is an arcade game on the home console. And it was released at a time when people were expecting more from a video game. There just really wasn't too much here, and I don't think the developers added enough to really make this one worth the price when it was released. Just in case you're wondering, that's going to be a running theme with these games. The developers just didn't add anything new to them. Rampage 2 Universal Tour was released in 1999 on the PS1, N64, and Game Boy Color. It tried to, make some minor improvements to the series formula, but it didn't really do too much aside from adding some more cutscenes into it and more monsters. There are also some special attacks that each monster can do, but you're still running around on a single screen, destroying a city, and then moving on to the next one where you're going to do the same thing all over again. It's fine, I guess, but I'm a little biased because I did enjoy Rampage so much. I haven't really mentioned the story in these games too much, and there's a reason for that. It's pretty paper thin. For most of these games, you are going to be fighting Scum Labs, and you play as monsters who are mutated by the actions of Scum Labs. In Rampage 2, you are trying to save the 3 original monsters who got captured in World Tour. So there's that. It's kind of a cool idea. And you have 3 new monsters because Scum Lab just keeps doing terrible things. So it's kind of a fun idea to have games like this where they just keep adding more monsters to it. And it would have been nicer if they had done that and then added more things for you to do. But they didn't do that. So yeah, it's not really anything different from what you had previously done. You're still destroying cities, but with this one you have a little bit more story, and you can kind of choose which cities you destroy first, whether you want to go save Ralph, you want to save George, or save Lizzie. The 3 new monsters are pretty cool. The developers gave special moves to each monster, so that's at least a little bit different. But yeah, it's not anything different from the other games. And that was one of the major criticisms for it when you looked at any of the reviews. This one got a little bit better scores than the second game did, or at least World Tour did. But overall, they still pretty much pointed out how nothing had changed from the previous game, and that's more or less true. It is the same arcade formula that you dealt with in the previous 2 games. Well, I like it. There's not really too much else to it. You're still just destroying you're destroying cities, and yeah, I don't really know what else to say about it at this point, so let's just move on to Rampage Through Time. Rampage Through Time feels like one of the horror movie franchises that is just completely run out of ideas and really needs to jump the shark in order to generate any interest in it. Unfortunately, they already did that when they went into space, so the only other place they could go is through time. Yeah, it's pretty much the same gameplay as the previous games, except for now they've given you two shit AI companions who are way more of a problem than anything else going on in this game. I cannot express how awful they are and how much they just get in the goddamn way. For this game, the roster got expanded. It didn't necessarily make anything better, it just means you have more monsters that can run around destroying buildings. It really didn't do too much to make Scum Labs more or less evil. It's kind of weird that that company is still, allowed to exist in the world of Rampage, but I guess whatever. The two AI companions sounds kind of cool. It sounds like a good idea until you actually start playing and you realize that they're way more of a hindrance than anything else, as they constantly try to go in the wrong direction and limit where you can actually, move around on the screen, and then they randomly just get pissed off at you and start attacking. It's not good. I really wish that they were not in the story mode when you play it, but you're stuck with them, and it really sucks. Rampage Through Time received the lowest scores out of any of the games in the series. By this time, reviewers were pretty tired of arcade gameplay, and you could really tell that when you went through the reviews for the Rampage games, and especially when you got to this one. Unlike another series that Midway brought back, Gauntlet, they didn't really do anything to modernize this franchise. It's still the same basic formula of, dealing with one screen of buildings and then moving on to the next. It would have been nice if they had tried something new, but that just was not in the cards for this series. I liked this game much more than the three PS1 games. Rampage Total Destruction was released in 2006 on the GameCube and PS1, and then 1 year later in 2007 it was released for the Wii. It's another reboot of the series, and it's also the last release for the home console. This game has a huge roster of monsters, most of which have to be unlocked, and there's a ton of attacks that you can also unlock while you're playing it. So as you're going through this, you're just adding more and more things that you can do in the game, which is kind of covering up for the fact that you're still doing the same thing that you were doing back in 1986. The developers actually did quite a bit to try to modernize this game. You've got a bunch of game modes to it, there's a lot of stuff that you can do in the game, or at least a bunch of versions of destroying buildings that you can do in the game. Because it's still Rampage, that's still what you're trying to do. However, in this one, you're not trying to get revenge on Scum Labs. Everyone seems pretty okay with them doing what they're doing. And this time, it's creating a soft drink that turns people into giant monsters that destroy cities. I'm not sure how that's going to help their bottom line, but hey, I'm not an evil corporation, so I don't really understand what they do anyway. Rampage Total Destruction received average reviews, which I think is about right for a game like this. It's not really doing anything different from what the series has been doing, or had been doing for 20 years at that point. And yeah, it's a lot more fun than the three PS1 games. That's not really saying anything different from what I've said in the previous parts of this video, so I'll just kind of move on. I liked it, but people were looking for a lot more than just an arcade game in 2006. They wanted their video games to actually do more things, or have more stuff to do than what was being offered here by Midway. In 2018, there was a movie that was loosely based on the Rampage series. It took some liberties with the game's story by getting rid of a lot of the recognizable elements from the game's story. But that's okay because it was pretty paper thin anyway, and if they wanted to stretch this out, they had to, do something. So we have the 3 original monsters, and we kind of have the mouse monster from, I believe it was Universal Tour. Sort of. It's a little weird. It just shows up in the satellite that's apparently orbiting the Earth that this company is doing genetic testing on. And then it dies, so don't worry about the mouse. I remember being really excited for this movie when it first got announced, and then completely forgetting about it until, earlier in 2025 when I decided to sit down and actually watch it. Once I did, it was fine. It wasn't really anything special. It did exactly what I wanted a Rampage movie to do, have 3 giant monsters destroying a city. And for some odd reason, The Rock was in it, which, I guess that was okay. They made it more about, The Rock and George than about any of the others. I kept having to remind myself that Lizzie was in this movie because they just completely forget about her, and it seems like nobody realized that there was a giant crocodile roaming through the waters. There was so much focus on George and Ralph that it was just odd. I don't know why, but it really felt like the people making this completely forgot about Lizzie until the very end, when she becomes the hardest one to kill. And then I was a little sad because, Lizzie dies in this, but oh well. The movie then teases a sequel that we're probably never going to get, and everybody went back to forgetting about Rampage again. To go along with the movie, though, there were a few video games released. There was an arcade adaptation of the movie, which was partially sponsored by Dave & Buster's, so it was exclusive to Dave & Buster's, restaurants. If you can't tell, I've never been to one, so I'm not really sure how to classify those. From what I saw of it, it's pretty much the same as what the other Rampage games have been. There was also a free browser game called Rampage City Smash. That thing is kind of a whole mess. I can't find a playable version of it anywhere. There are a few review videos of it, but that's pretty much it, and that game seems to be gone forever. There was also an augmented reality game that still has a Steam page store, but the game is no longer available. This was really sad to see going through this section of the video, just because it felt like, a graveyard. Just wandering through and looking at the tombstones of games that showed up for about 9 months and then were just gone. I'm assuming that the arcade game is still around, just because that's how arcade games work. So you can probably still get a hold of that if you own an arcade or if you really want to buy modern arcade games. There are probably some ways that you can play it online as well, but I was just not really all that interested in doing it at this point. These games didn't really seem to leave much of an impression. They're just kind of, gone for the most part. We didn't get another console game as far as I can tell, and it doesn't look like Warner Brothers is too interested in bringing this franchise back, just because it's been 7 years now. It's kind of sad. When I went back to watch the 2018 movie, and also when I was writing all of this up, it made me think about all of the other giant monster movies that could have inspired Rampage. The obvious ones are King Kong and Godzilla, but where the hell did Ralph come from? He's a giant wolf monster. How did that actually come into play? And I also found out that there were other giant lizard movies, 20 Million Miles to Earth, which is kind of fun. I like it. It's got a lot of claymation in it. you see this weird alien monster fight an elephant for some weird reason. It's kind of cool. I really dug that movie. But looking up just what all of these different monsters were and all the possible monster movies that could have inspired them from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, I kind of fell down a rabbit hole of other giant monster movies. Was this entire video just an excuse for me to spend a day watching bad monster movies? Of course it was. I had a lot of fun doing it. Most of these are kind of bad. Some of them are fairly good. And a lot of them have some pretty awesome special effects for the time. It was a lot of fun to go back and look at just all of these weird ones that I had never heard of before, just to see what was going on with them. I found a few that could have been inspirations for Lizzie. Obviously, there was King Kong from the 1930s. And then there was one about a werewolf in London that, was suggested as being, possibly the inspiration for Ralph. But that one doesn't really make a whole lot of sense because it's just a regular werewolf. Some dude goes to Tibet and he gets infected by a werewolf that happens to be there at the same time he is. He comes back and, he has a cure for it, or at least something that is like a temporary measure for it. It's weird. I don't even remember the title. I probably have it written down in my notes, but it's kind of lost somewhere at the moment. So Ralph is the only one that I'm just completely at a loss for where that one came from. Lizzie definitely came from 20 Million Miles to Earth, because that's sort of what Lizzie is modeled on, that weird alien creature from Venus. And George is obviously King Kong. Just any giant ape like that seems to be based on King Kong, so not really a whole lot of getting around that. But yeah, I just hit a dead end with Ralph. Then I looked at all of the other monsters in the games, and I kind of found other movies that could have been an inspiration for them. And I realized just how many goddamn monster movies there actually were. You pick an animal, and there is a giant monster movie for it. It's insane when you go through all these. It can be a lot of fun to, spend a day, if you have a day to waste, on all these different movies, because you can find a lot of them free online. In 2009, Midway filed for bankruptcy, and several game studios purchased its assets. Most notable among them was Mortal Kombat, which was bought by Warner Brothers and then spun off into its own company. Other, franchises were NBA Jam, the Cruisin' series, and NFL Blitz. Rampage was one of the lesser-known series that they had, and that one was bought up by Warner Brothers. That's how Warner Brothers was able to do the 2018 movie. Kind of weird that they just forgot about the series for 9 years, but that's kind of what happens when you have so many just franchises that you can do something with, but you end up choosing none of them, and you put out random stuff that most people may or may not want. Since the 2018 movie, there really hasn't been much movement on anything related to the Rampage series. It honestly wasn't the most memorable name from Midway, and it was always just more of an arcade game. It didn't get the same treatment as the Gauntlet series in the 1990s and the 2000s, and yeah, there's not really much you can do with it, or at least nobody wanted to do too much with it. The 1986 game will always be fun for me. The sequels can be fun for a little bit, but mostly it's just sort of, okay, this was fun for 20 minutes, now I want to move on and do something else. If I had to rank them, I would say the original was my favorite, and then Total Destruction was next. Then World Tour, Universal Tour, and Rampage Through Time was my least favorite. And that's pretty much all we've got with the Rampage series. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later.